Okay, so I let it whip. Together? I let it whip. And you say, well, that's not very loving. You should be running after it and trying to grab a hold of it and make sure that it's doing what it is you want it to do. Well, there are times to do that, but most of the time that doesn't work. Have you noticed? So I had a friend who was from an East Coast family. Anybody from an East Coast family? Yeah. And so the East Coast families, stereotypes here, are in each other's business a lot. That's kind of a deal, you know? And it's kind of a deal. And so one thing he would tell me about, because he had like 4 brothers and they were in business together and they were dealing with all kinds of stuff together. And they had the father and the mother and all the different relatives, and they were all in each other's stuff. And I asked him, how do you deal with that? Because I noticed the dynamic going on. And he said, oh, well, I just let it whip. I said, what do you mean let it whip? He said, well, you know, it works every time if I do it. If I stand in my sacred center, in the center of the cyclone, I can just let them whip around, and I can let it all whip around. But if I stay in my center and I let it whip, it always works. If I let it whip, it always works. Together? If I let it whip, it always works. You say, that's not spiritual. I should be out there fixing it. I have a friend, and she and I are both dealing with something outside of our church organizational structure. But it's there's a lot of drama going on, all kinds of stuff whipping. And we have the same conversation over and over again in which she says, wow, I really want to be in that calm, less anxious presence, in that centered space. And gosh, I really want to do that. And so I really want to stand with you in that sacred space, that quiet, calm, less anxious place. Oops, wow, whee! And then she goes on a ride. And then when she gets tired of the ride, and she gets kind of bruised and banged up and things run into her, she puts it down. She goes, oh, I want to go back. I want to start again and be kind of in this quiet space. Yeah. Whee! And then she lets it whip. So what do? Well, I had a mutual friend say, well, you need to make sure that she doesn't do that. Nope. I let it whip. Together? I let it whip. And you say, that's not loving, but how about Jesus? I'm going to tell you a story from the Bible that, unless you're a real hardcore Bible scholar, you've never heard of it before. And there's a reason why. It's because it's Jesus, the rude codependent. You see, the man walked up to Jesus and said, Master, you tell my brother to share his inheritance with me. And Jesus said, who made me a divider? Did anyone make me a divider? And that's the end of the Bible verse. I think Jesus was rude. And if he really loved them, he would have intervened on their behalf. Wouldn't you agree? How often do we live like that? Now, do you want God to be your codependent? Do you want your spiritual resource to be your... Or are you willing to stand in your sacred center? I was this week up in Milwaukee, and I got trained and certified as a Healthy Congregations Training Facilitator by Martha Creek. And guys, it was 2 days up there, and it was a lot of good things, but she said a lot of interesting things. One of the things she said was to somebody who was really upset because things were not the way they thought it should be. And she looked at me and says, it's reality, honey. Make friends with it. It's reality, honey. I make friends with it. Together? It's reality, honey. I make friends with it. Now, does that mean that you're not supposed to affect change or do things or whatever? Yeah, but it's not the thing you think you're supposed to do. The one thing you're not supposed to do is go out there and go wee around in a circle. I remember there was a couple many, many years ago, 20 years ago in a church, and they were going through a lot of stuff, and they separated. And they would take turns. One would come to me or the other would come to me and say, I need you to go tell him this and this and this. And then she'd come, I need you to go tell her this and this and this and this. And I'd say, let me work with you right now. And I'd go, well, if you really cared about us, or don't you care? I mean, don't you know what would happen if you won't do this? I mean, everything. And I wasn't going to go, wee. Guess what? I couldn't take the blame for what was going on, but I couldn't take the credit either when they worked it out like adults. You see, everybody's on their own path. That doesn't mean that you don't offer support. But Jesus said, let your light shine. You are the light of the world. Put your light up on a lampstand so everyone can see it. Not take the light and hit each other over the head with it or shove it down their throats. It's a non-intrusive, non-invasive thing. And one of the things that really came up, it's in a lot of the literature that's out there, be a calm, non-anxious presence. And I like the way Martha Creek modified it. She says, that's not realistic. Why don't you be a calm, less anxious presence? You could be less anxious to the people around you. Somebody walked out after the service and explained to me that I had once shared with her that she and her family was the designated driver. And I said, well, what did I mean by that? I couldn't remember. That means that everybody's whipping around and I'm the sober one. And that's your role. You may be the one who is the grown-up. You say, well, that's not fair. I don't want to play that role. Well, guess what? It's reality, honey. Make friends with it. And by the way, when I talk this way, when I talk about using our spiritual principles in a new way, not to fix everyone. And Jesus said, who made me the divider? It's not my job. But what was his job? Well, let's look at his worst case scenario. Judas. Okay, so he had just identified that the next person that's going to dip is going to be the one who's going to betray him, and Judas is the one, and then he turns to Judas and says, what? What you do, go do it quickly. What? That's not loving. It's kind of like, look, you're going to do it, so get it over with. He didn't fight it. This is turning the other cheek. This is making friends with your adversary quickly. This is a different kind of love. My mentor back in the 1980s, or 1990s, first half, was Dr. Mary Allen, and she talked about a lot of things that I share in the services. But one of the things she said was that if you take a truth, a spiritual truth, and you try to push it too far, it becomes false. Now you think, how can a spiritual thing be false if you push it too far? Well, on the ideal level, and here I go again, but on the ideal level, the fourth dimensional level, the level of divine ideas, you can't push anything too far because there's no opposites. It's just oneness. So yes, there's no way you can love too much. But in applying it on the physical level, trying to behaviorally apply things, you can't push things too far. For instance, I should have good boundaries, shouldn't I? But if I push it too far, I become rigid and cut off and stern and harsh, and I hurt people. I should be kind, shouldn't I? But if I push it too hard, I'm enabling, and I'm helping to make another person weak. So it's an interesting thing. So where's the balance point? Where indeed? How do you discern it? How indeed? By getting into that calm, sacred space of less anxiety. By being the designated driver, the sober one, the grown-up in the room, by being that less anxious presence. And it takes me doing the work yourself, focusing on this, and then this will take care of itself. That means letting go of outcomes. And I know it's tricky. Well, I want an outcome. Paradoxically, you'll get a better outcome to the extent that you can let go of outcomes. How can that be? Because you're not anxious about it and you can think clearly. It's like put on your oxygen mask first before giving it to your child. Yeah, but I want to save my child's life. Good. You'll both die if you don't do it this way. Put it on your face first so you can have enough oxygen in your brain so that you can do something for them. And the same thing for you. Do what you need to do to get your space, to get your clarity, so that you can then meet the needs of those around you. I remember once I was in a tough situation with an extremely domineering, difficult person. This guy was just really tough. And I knew that my job was to stand up to him. Because after all, what he was doing, this, and this, and this, and this. And you know what? I was right about all that. Well, how about instead of standing up to him, it came to be meditation, stand up for yourself. So don't stand up to anyone, stand up for yourself. I don't stand up to anyone, I stand up for myself. Together? I don't stand up to anyone, I stand up for myself. Now, hear the difference. And what is the difference? The difference is you may do the same exact thing, but you're not doing it to get them to change. Because the bottom line is that, nobody ever made anybody change but a baby with a diaper. You can't make another person change. What you can do is work on yourself, and then you know what you can and can't do. You are sober, you are sane, you are less anxious, you've got the oxygen mask on. You're doing the thing that you need to do in order to handle the situation for you. As Lynn teaches parenting classes, and one of the things that you have to get clear at the very outset is you cannot control a whole lot of the things that you think you can control in your child's behavior. You cannot do it. You cannot make that baby take that mouthful of food. You can do a lot of other things, but you can't make them swallow it. And yet, we do spend our lives trying to get things handled in that way. So how do we become that less anxious presence? How do we become that calm, sacred space? How do we get into that? And we did it during the meditation, and that is the spiritual thermometer. We've got, like I always have these handouts, This is right outside between the men's room and the fellowship hall on a little table. And I advise you to get this, put it up on your nightstand or on your mirror or somewhere. And use this as a meditative exercise like we did. Just find out where you are on the spiritual thermometer. You say, oh, that's so simple. And after all, it's just my imagination anyway. Yeah, but what else you got to work with? And the truth is that your imagination got you into this thing anyway. You might as well change it. Because you imagined your life at some point, at some time. And so now it's time to reimagine it. And so get into that clear thing. And it's so much more of a matter of not what you do, but where you do it from. It says on this chart that Lynn designed based on Jane Elizabeth Hart's teaching here, that below the 5 is the ego, where there's drama, fear, and danger, and the warnings are do not make decisions and do not take action. Because even if you do the right thing, but you're back under a 5, it'll have the wrong result. You can be above a 5 and do something that doesn't seem to be the right thing, and it'll turn out right. As my old favorite band, the Grateful Dead, said, once in a while you get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. And, sometimes you will make a move, but you'll be in the right consciousness, and it'll all be turned to good. You say, well, I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to address things spiritually. Paul in Romans said something really interesting. He said, sometimes when you don't know how to pray, the Spirit will intercede for you in such a way that is deeper than words themselves. Because for a person who loves God, everything turns to good. Sometimes when you do your spiritual work, if you're in the right consciousness, you will get your spiritual assistance. It will come through for you, but it'll do in a way that you didn't have any idea. You thought you were over here handling this thing over here. You thought this was the answer, and actually it's going to work out completely over here, but you're not. You're so locked up into a specific solution. I call this the gumball theory of spirituality, I'm going to put a quarter in the gum machine, I'm going to turn it and crank, and I'm going to get not only exactly a gumball, but the gumball color I want. It doesn't work that way. Instead, we need to have a fluid and dynamic and engaged relationship with life itself, because it's reality, honey. Make friends with it. And know that in every now moment is an opportunity for us to choose to come up higher, to come from this place. And it means moving out of that need to manage, manipulate, control, and make everything exactly the way we want it. And to know that there's more than one right way to do things. And that's one of the illusions church illusions we have to really release. I remember once I was invited back to speak at a church where I had once been, and I was invited back by the minister, and to my shock and chagrin, there was a group of people who didn't like the fact that the church had changed from what I was doing to whatever she was doing. And the people were raising their hand in front of their board and everybody, and I knew anything I used could be used against me. So they were saying, well, what about this? And they're not doing this, and they're not doing that, and here I am, I'm just trying to give a workshop. I finally just said, you go to your favorite Mexican restaurant, and they've got these burritos, they're chicken burritos, they're so good. And then that closes, and then they open up a Chinese restaurant, and they got this thing called mushu pork. How many people know what mushu pork is? What does it look like? Looks like a burrito, right? But what's the difference? Well, instead of having chicken and beans and rice inside of it, it's got bamboo shoots and strips of pork and all kinds of stuff. So you go in and you go pick it up and you're ready to take a bite of it. That's the worst chicken burrito I've ever had in my life. How dare they? It's a Chinese restaurant. And yet, how many of us stand in front of our loved ones, our friends, our neighbors, our company, our church, or whatever, and go, this should be a Mexican restaurant, and it's a Chinese restaurant. That's not a burrito, it's mushu pork. It's reality, honey. Make friends with it. And then letting it go. Not mixing in, but allowing things to be. And then you got the energy left over to do something that's constructive with your life. You're not wasting your time trying to take care of the teacup handle. This analogy popped into my head, but I had lunch with Jane Elizabeth Hart last time she was here, and she said, you know, Greg, sometimes I notice this about you. It's like there's a teacup, and it's filled with tea, but you're so fixated on the teacup handle, and the teacup handle, and what's the teacup handle doing, that you forget that the point is to drink the tea out of this part. We get fixated on the things that are unimportant in life, and then miss the important things. So, what kind of things can you do? Well, you say, yeah, but you don't know about my relationship. You don't know how I am dealing with this and this and this and this. It's important to lift up out of the familiar danger zone below a 5. And one of the tools for the people who are more advanced people in the deep end of the pool, and I'm going to share this, it's located in the same place right outside the Fellowship Hall, is the 22 questions adapted from the book, Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You by Jordan and Margaret Paul, and it's called What to Do When You're Stuck in Your Communication. And it's 22 questions that you ask or yourself and then answer, and each of you take turns. And I'm telling you something, Lynn and I have done this, what do you think, 200 times? Something like that, 300 times? A lot of times. Without exception, two things happen. There's a point during doing these questions when you know to the very fiber of your being that it is not going to work and this is a complete waste of your time and you're going to quit. Every time. And the second thing that's true is by the end of the 22nd question, it has resolved itself without exceptions. And often you're on the 22nd question before there's any slight glimmer of that possibility. Why is it? It's not because it's magic. It's because you're getting outside of yourself. You're lifting yourself up above a 5. And this isn't, don't go home and make another fight over doing this. You both have to want to do it. But if you start it, you both have to be absolutely, positively, ironclad, committed to finish it. Because if you stop on number 17, it will seem like it'll never work. Just keep going to the end. Has anybody ever done this? Anybody raise your hand? I've only been talking about it for 4.5 years. Okay. So, try it. Try it. You might like it. But it is for the deep end of the pool. It's for the stuck times when you're just stuck. You know why we're stuck, right? It's because I'm right. Those are the times when you're stuck, because you know you're right. I know I'm right. So, and that's called being stuck. Because even if I'm right, I'm not right in the way I think I'm right. So, and work through it, work with it, and you will get to the other side of it. These are all little tools, little things you can do. But the important thing to do is to not stay stuck in the consciousness you're in. And often that means, as my mentors once said, Mary Ellen said, you need to back off far enough from an individual sometimes to love them. Enough of a distance to love them. And that means giving people space for their process. Like the little 3-year-old said in one of my children's lessons, and I said, what do you do when somebody's angry at you and believes a bunch of things that aren't true? And she raised her hand, 3 years old, says, I let them have their feelings. I let them have their feelings. Oh my gosh. Where'd she come from? And what's she bringing in for the rest of us? So I let them have their feelings. Letting people have their feelings. I'm going to give you I was at this workshop on churches, and I don't want to tire you with church stories, but here's a church story. Actually, two. Here's the way to not do it and the way to do it. Nearly 30 years ago, there was a minister who was murdered, and they hired a minister to replace her who was exactly the spit and image of the minister who was murdered, had the same degrees, came from the same place, was basically the closest thing they could do. Does that sound like something that's going to work out? I don't know. But I remember talking to the person and saying, what are you going to do? And she said, I'm going to heal them. We're going to have all these groups, they're all going to meet, they're all going to do it, I'll facilitate them all, and I'm going to help them, and we're going to work through their grief. People work through, it's good to facilitate things. I'm not saying you can't, but boy. Well, people have their feelings, and was it surprising that the people would project onto the person who looked just like the person who, quote, abandoned them? Never mind that she was murdered, but that's an emotional reaction. So that doesn't make sense. Feelings don't make sense. And so it was a big blow up, and that woman went on to become a very successful minister somewhere else. But she was trying to fix everyone. That doesn't mean that there aren't things for you to do, but you have to be careful how much responsibility you take for another person. The other example was Robert Schuller. He put on a workshop for 20 people where I was serving, and I went to it, and it was a free workshop in which he was going through and trying to work out the bugs in a particular book he was writing. But as part of it, in giving us a meal and paying for it all himself, oh boy, he had 1 hour of questions. And so these ministers would, and one of them typically raised his hand, I got this person in my church, and they're this, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know. Have you ever dealt with something like this? He says, oh yeah, many times. Well, what do? I outlast him. Outlast him? What do you mean? Well, if they can do it for this long, I just do it longer. I just wait. And he's that less anxious presence, and then it works itself out. He says, I think of myself as the old moon up in the sky. It's shining. It just keeps shining. Dogs howl at it, dogs bark at it, but it just keeps shining. And not to be arrogant, not to put yourself above people, but sometimes you've got to be the adult. Sometimes you've got to be the sober person, the designated driver, the conscious person in the room, the adult in the room. Sometimes it's yours to be the less anxious presence. You say, I got to be a non-anxious presence. No, don't lay that on yourself. It's not possible. You're going to have all kinds of stuff going, but just be less anxious. Be the center of the cyclone, let it whip around you. One time I dealt with a very tough situation, and what came to me was, if you stay within the folds of the angel's wings and don't go out there trying to fix everything, you'll be protected. And naturally, 3 or 4 times I rushed out and tried to fix everything, and I got myself all whipped while I was going, whee! And then I went back to the center, and to the extent that I did it, it all worked out. So this is some challenging stuff. As Jesus said, that's not my job. I'm not your divider. Who appointed me to do that? And you didn't hear that in Sunday school because we don't want to hear that part. But that's perhaps the most underrated part of his teaching. That he taught people that when I send you out into the communities, some people will love you, some people won't. As Martha Creek says, some will, some won't, so what? And he said, you'll put your peace out, and sometimes it will rest there. Other times it'll come back to you, and when it comes back to you, shake the dust off your feet and move on. Don't get into it. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to get it understood. Don't try to do all that stuff. Instead, just go into your sacred place, kick the dust off your feet, and let it go. So we're going to do a little prayer right now. So we just need to do this right now. So just move into this moment. And we're just going to do this right now. So just take a deep breath and let it out. And move into this sacred space, into this sacred presence. And let it be. And trust that whatever it is that's whipping around you, whatever it is that's going on, is going to do what it's going to do. And make a commitment to yourself that you will be a less anxious presence. You will be in that calm space. And imagine once again you're moving up to that place on the spiritual thermometer the place that you need to be. And lift up into it. And when a little part of your mind says, oh, this is just my imagination, just say to it, and that's all I've got. And feel yourself growing lighter and more spacious. And knowing just what to do. And to everything that's whipping around you in your life, including your own emotional states, just say, I loose you, I let you go, and I cast this on God and I go free. And now let the outcomes go and know that they will work out for the highest good of all concerned, without interference by you. And if there's something for you to do, you will know what that is. And you will do it. Thank you, God. And so it is. Amen. And now setting aside everything you have in your hands, take a deep breath, let it out, and open your palms and feel receptive. Feel that receptivity. Setting aside everything. And putting yourself into this moment, knowing that what's more important when all is said and done in life is not the outcome. It's not what we think is supposed to happen. But it's our being fully present in the process as things unfold. We will paradoxically get better outcomes to the extent that we let go of them. We will have things turn out for the highest and best to the extent that we let go into this very moment and align ourselves with the highest and best for all concerned. Imagine that your world is moving around you as if you're standing in the center of a cyclone. And as long as you stay in the center, as long as you are safe within the folds of the angel's wings, in the center, that which is around you can move and whip and do whatever it needs to, but you are safe. You are protected. Because you can let things go, and you can even let them whip, and be in your sacred, calm space, less anxious space. Perhaps in your world, with all the people around you, you are the adult. Perhaps in your world, it seems like you're the designated driver. But this is your role, to be that calm, less anxious presence in the center, allowing the movement around you, but knowing it is not yours to direct that movement. It is yours to be in the presence and power of the sacred center. And now imagine that spiritual thermometer, a bulb thermometer, with red mercury in the glass, that's a vertical thermometer that is calibrated from 1 to 10. 1 at the bottom, 10 at the top. And at the 5 is the point of demarcation between your lower self and your higher self, between your ego and your soul, between that place where you have anxiety, fear, and danger, and that higher place where you have answers, solutions, guidance. And in this moment, ask yourself, where am I on this thermometer? Where on a scale of 1 to 10? And accept the number. And if one doesn't come, just say, if I knew what it was, what is it? and accept it. And now imagine, where would you like to be? With everything in your life moving and whipping around you exactly as it is, where would you like to be on that scale? 8, 9, 10? And imagine that thermometer, the mercury within it, lifting up, lifting up, lifting up to that higher place. And as you see that red line go up, up, up to that new number, feel yourself lifting up, becoming more spacious, more open, more light-filled, less anxious, more calm, and open, and just rest there for a moment. And now to all the activity of your life, just say, I cast this on God and I go free. And all there is presence. All there is calm peace. All there is this moment and your sacred presence. Thank you, God, that we let everything go. We fully and freely release it to its highest good, and we free ourselves to our highest good. And so it is. And as we prepare for our time of giving, we're going to take as our statement, I give from my sacred space and I receive from my sacred space. So just take that thought and let's say it aloud. I give from my sacred space and I receive from my sacred space. And silently. And again aloud together. I give from my sacred space and I receive from my sacred space. And so it is.